Good morning. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Bethanne. Today I wanted to talk about Buzz by Thor Hanson, The Nature and Necessity of Bees. This is the third book that I picked to read specifically for Nonfiction November. I chose this one to fit the prompt Buzz, very obviously. I just got a big kick out of that. For those who haven't watched any of my previous videos for Nonfiction November, I decided to shop my own bookshelves and selected 4 books that I hadn't read yet from my bookshelves. Part of an ongoing attempt to actually read the books that I have, and also I don't like spending money, so win-win. And this embarrassingly has been on my shelves since it was published. I am a researcher who I'm a research scientist, and I work with native bees, and I was very excited when this book came out, immediately bought it, and then immediately didn't read it, just disappeared into my shelves. So I'm very glad that I finally got to this. So this book is just a broad, beautifully written treatment of what are bees. Where do we see them? What do we get out of them? So Thor Hanson takes a really kind of a really zoomed out perspective. And I just wanted to look again at the chapter list real quickly, just to remind myself what the different sections are about. So he starts out with kind of defining what is a bee, as opposed to some of the things that are often confused with bees or lumped in with bees. So mainly wasps and hornets primarily, so differentiating bees from those two groups of organisms, and describing some of the unique biology of bees. And I just love some of his chapter titles. He's got The Living Vibrato, which is describing exactly what a bee's body is. And obviously I'm sure you're thinking, oh, vibrato, buzzing, that makes sense. So he just has a very kind of lyrical way of writing nonfiction that I really enjoyed. So after those kind of descriptive chapters of just what is a bee, how do they live, he has a section on the actual relationship between bees and flowers. And so that covers kind of a summary of how bees and flowers evolved together, which is really, really cool. Just this tight coevolutionary relationship that just drove increasing adaptation on both sides with the bees and the flowers. And then he has a section on bees and people, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, actually, when I picked up this book. I thought it was mostly going to be just about the bees themselves, but he has 3 chapters on bees and people, so on kind of our shared history. And this part was really cool to me because I didn't know it well at all, actually, diving into some recent anthropological research that's looking into the actual history of human evolution in Africa, and how that might have been influenced by honeybees and keeping honey, because honey is a rare source of easy, sweet sugar in the natural world. And so that might have helped kind of drive or support the evolution of our huge brains, which require a lot of sugar to run. So I thought that was a really cool chapter. Then he has a chapter called Keeping Dumbledores, which is Dumbledore is a very old name for bumblebees. And so in that one, he's talking about kind of bumblebee nesting habitats and bumblebee colonies. And people do raise bumblebee colonies. They're actually quite an important part of our agricultural process. For example, things like tomatoes are pollinated almost exclusively by bumblebees in an industrial setting, and so we have bumblebee colonies that get put into tomato greenhouses. So he's talking a little bit about just how would you keep bumblebees. And then he has a section about our food system called Every Third Bite, talking about how much we rely on bees for the food that we eat. And in that chapter, he has a very cute gimmick. He goes to McDonald's and orders a Big Mac burger and eats only the parts that are not explicitly dependent on bees, and he ends up with the saddest burger in the world, if you ask me. I won't necessarily give away he had to take everything off, basically. It sounded disgusting. And then he ends with 2 chapters on the future of bees. So addressing specifically just a brief summary of kind of what we know about colony collapse disorder and the threats to honeybees, and then focusing on the loss of some of our native bees, especially in North America. We have a couple of bumblebee species that are now either considered extinct or listed on the endangered species list. And so he mentions those and some thoughts about why those bees are declining. So this was really, I mean, it covered everything in a very brief way. He covers a lot of breadth, and the way that he addresses depth is he's kind of picking, key examples. So as a bee scientist, I'm reading this being like, well, but what about this? What about this? Which is a stupid way to read a book. But that's kind of the problem when you know a lot about a topic. You're like, why didn't this author write the book exactly the way that I would have? Which is stupid. He wrote a way better book than I would ever be capable of writing. One thing I really like about this book is that he clearly has had a very long passion for bees and a very long established interest in bees. And so I think some of the things that he's talking about doing to research this book really come across as things that he was doing anyway, like years before he was even writing the book, perhaps, not the sort of things that you go do once you have an advance from a publisher necessarily. I think this book was really, it just feels like the outcome of kind of a life of being interested in bees, or at least an adult life being interested in bees. And so with each of the chapters, he has really kind of a memoirist's approach almost to setting up the chapter, because he has really powerful moments of his life where he can talk about kind of the gain in his understanding, or what sparked him to ask the question that led to some of the material that he includes in that chapter. And a lot of them are things, with his own garden, or with his son, as his son grows up, basically from a baby to a teenager almost. The encounters that his son has with bees and the curiosity that his son has with bees, spark their own kind of little experiments and studies. At one point they were experimenting with, if you want to get a bumblebee queen to nest on the porch of your shed, how do you build the most appropriate kind of like nest contrivance that she might want to take advantage of? It was something that he did with his son years and years ago. So I really liked that approach of just having almost like these little snippets of memoir that kind of led into the questions that were then addressed by the scientific material. And to me, that just captured so much of the scientific process. I mean, especially, I should say, for ecologists, for people whose science is based very strongly in natural history, you go out and you experience something and you wonder about it and you start asking why, and then you end up with a PhD and don't get paid very much to try to answer why, which turns out to be very hard to answer. So that's science. Anyway, yeah, so this book, it was great. I think this book would be completely accessible to absolutely anyone who wants to just learn a little bit more about bees. It's actually quite short. It's shorter than its length suggests, because he has quite a long notes section at the end with extra little snippets that just didn't fit into like exactly what he wanted the chapter to be, but provide a lot of extra information. So those notes were great, but that's quite a long section. He has quite a long bibliography as well. And then he has a nice section at the end, actually, because he doesn't use scientific names of bees going through this. He has a very descriptive style, so he's describing them as things like digger bees, mason bees, which I think is most helpful in this sort of popular science book, because the name digger bee conjures an immediate image. You have some idea of what that means. It's a bee who's going to dig holes in the ground. And as you learn, then you learn more about what those nests are and what her behavior is and that sort of thing. But that name is very descriptive. So he doesn't use the scientific names, which are things like Coletidae, Andrenidae, which have much less meaning. But at the end of the book, he does have an appendix where each family gets its own page with a paragraph description of just kind of what are some of the general characteristics that apply to many of the bees in the family, and then an illustration of a representative bee in that family. So this also adds to the length of the book as well. But seems like it would be a good resource. I actually didn't read this little section about the families. So anyway, yeah, I really love this book. I highly recommend it. This is definitely one I'm going to be keeping on my shelves, and I will be reading it again in the future. And it's definitely the sort of thing that I would loan out to people. If I have a new friend that says, oh, you study bees? What the heck is up with bees? I'd be like, well, let me give you a book that's only 200 pages long by someone who can describe a good overview way better than I ever could. So anyway, I hope you'll all read it. We really need to learn more about native bees. as a society. We need to learn more about honeybees as a society. My own personal plug is that we know way more about honeybees than we do about native bees. And native bees are in much more trouble than honeybees because honeybees are farmed. They are completely supported. They essentially have bee doctors. They have people who will treat their parasites. They have people who will supplement their food. So as much as you hear about hives dying, and legitimately that, that is a concern, we should be worried about honeybee health and kind of the sustainability of our agricultural system that relies on honeybees so heavily. But they are not in any danger whatsoever of ever going extinct, our domesticated honeybees. So if you particularly are interested in helping supporting bees, potentially with volunteer work like planting flower gardens or financially giving to conservation organizations, I really strongly urge you to consider supporting organizations that have either a dual program of supporting both honeybees and native bees, or focusing more strongly on native bees because they're the ones that have much less research and support and seem to be in actual, well, not seem to be, are for sure in actual danger. So that's my personal plug. If you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments below. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what I'm doing, please subscribe, hit the like button, and I'd love to connect in the comments. Thanks. Bye.